This is Miss Humbert here. Today we're going to be doing Unit 1, Notes 9. So we're going to talk about graphing inequalities. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at just some review of graphing just to kind of get our brains in it. So you're going to be having to graph in slope-intercept and in standard form. So graphing with slope-intercept, remember the first thing you want to look for is your y-intercept. And your y-intercept here is 5. So we're crossing the y-axis at 5, which is here. And then my slope is -3. Well, remember when you have just a number, that's the same as -3 over 1. So from that 5, we're going down 1, 2, 3, and over 1. Now that we have our 2 points, we can go ahead and we can draw in that line. So taking a look at the second example, we need to solve this for y in order to graph it. So I'm going to go ahead, and since that's a negative x, I'm going to add x to both sides. So I get 3y is equal to x plus 6. So now I need to solve for y. So what I'm going to do is divide both sides by 3. Well, when I divide both sides by 3, I need to make sure I divide both of those pieces by 3. So this is going to become 1/3 x, and 6 divided by 3 is going to give me 2. So I'm crossing the y-axis at 2, so I'm going to go ahead and plot that point. Then my slope is 1/3, so I'm going up 1 and over 1, 2, 3, and plotting that point. Then I can go ahead and I can connect those, and voila, I have my line. Taking a look at the third example, x is equal to 5. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to find 5 on the x-axis, which is right here. Now if you remember, if you ever have an equation that's just x, that means you need to draw in a vertical line. Okay, so we're going to draw in a vertical line at x is equal to 5. If it was just y, it would be a horizontal line. So let's take a look at this. So you don't need to write any of this down. Just remember what those symbols mean. We talked about this way back on notes 3, I think, where we use the less than, greater than, less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to. Well, today we're going to be doing that with 2 variables. So this you're going to write in the little box right there. So graphing inequalities with 2 variables. Since they have 2 variables in them, we can't just solve them like normal inequalities. We have to graph them to get a solution. So this isn't just going to have one line, it's actually going to have a whole shaded region that we're going to use. So once you get finished writing this down, you can unpause the video and we'll take a look at the next part. So here are the steps, and I really suggest having this written down because it does help. So we're going to do the steps along with graphing number 4. So first thing you want to do is put the equation into slope-intercept form. So remember that to put it into slope-intercept form, maybe make a note to yourself. All that means is you need to solve for y. Okay, which this one conveniently already is, so we can skip the first step. So second, decide what line to make. If it's a dotted line, that means that there's no line underneath the inequality symbol. So if there's no line underneath, meaning it's strictly greater than or strictly less than, then you're going to use a dashed or dotted line. If it's a solid line underneath, then you need to graph with a solid line. Well, I see on number 4 that we have a solid line underneath our inequality symbol. So I'm going to graph using a solid line. Taking a look at the third one, decide where to shade. So here's how I like to look at it. If the alligator mouth is eating the y, if it's going to eat the y for dinner, you're going to shade up from the line. We'll talk about what that looks like in a second. If it's facing away from the y, we're going to shade down. Okay, so fourth is graphing and shading the line. Well, I see on number 4 that my alligator is facing away from the y, so I'm going to be shading down. So let's go ahead and let's graph this, a solid line shading down. So we're crossing the y-axis at 3. And then my slope is 2, which is the same as 2 over 1. So then from here, I'm going to go up 2 and over 1 and plot that point. Connecting those 2 lines, I have a solid line like so. Now I need to shade down from this line. So what I do is I pick a spot on the line, say here, then I just take my pencil and I drag it down. Where did my pen land? That's where I need to shade. So I landed down here, so I need to shade in that entire region underneath the line. Taking a look at number 5, we have some decisions to make. I see that there's no line underneath my inequality symbol, so that means that it needs to be dotted. I also see that the alligator is facing the y, so I know I need to shade up. So I'm crossing the y-axis at -6, which is right here. Then there's no number out in front of the x, which means it's a 1. So my slope is going to be 1 over 1. So from this y-intercept of -6, I go up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1. And I don't have a line underneath my inequality, which means that this is going to be connected with a dotted line. So look at that beautiful dotted line. And then I decided that I need to shade up. So I pick a spot on the line. I'll pick a spot right there. And then we're just going to go straight up from that spot. See where my pen landed? That's the area that I need to shade in, which is right there. So I shade everything above that line. Let's take a look at number 6. So for number 6, we're crossing the y-axis at 2. So I'm going to go ahead and plot that point. Now I need to make a couple of decisions. The alligator's facing the y, so I need to shade up. And it's also, there's a line underneath the inequality, so I'm going to have a solid line. So from that 2, my slope is -4, which means it's -4 over 1. So I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, and over 1. And then from there, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make that a solid line. Then I'm going to pick a spot on that line. From that spot, I'm going to go up. And where my pen landed is where I'm going to shade in. Okay, taking a look at number 7, we do not have a line underneath, so it's going to be dotted. And again, the alligator's facing the y, so we're going to shade up. We're crossing the y-axis at -2, and our slope is 1/2. So from that -2, we're going up 1 and over 2. So I'm going to go ahead and plot that point. So those points are connected with a dashed line. So then I want to pick a spot on that line and I'm going to shade up from it. So then I'm going to shade in that region up from the line. Taking a look at numbers 8 and 9. They're in standard form, which means we have to solve them for y. So I have 3x minus 2y is greater than -6. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we are going to solve this for y. So the first thing I want to do is get that 3x over to the other side. Since it's positive, I'm going to subtract 3x. So I have -2 is greater than -3x minus 6. So now that -2 is being multiplied by the y, so I'm going to multiply both sides by a -2. If you think back to when we had inequalities, whenever you divide both sides by a negative number, you have to flip the symbol. So I'm going to go ahead and flip that inequality symbol. Well, -3 divided by -2 is going to cancel out to a positive. So it's going to become a positive 3/2, and then we have x. -6 divided by -2 is also going to become positive, and that's going to give us a positive 3. So now we have some decisions to make. There's no line underneath the inequality, so it's going to be dotted. And I noticed that at the very end, after I've solved everything, that the alligator's facing away from the y, which means I need to shade down. You always look at your final answer when it comes to shading. So we're crossing the y-axis at 3. And then my slope is 3 over 2. So I'm going up 1, 2, 3, and over 2. So I'm going to go ahead and connect that with a dotted line, like so. And then I remember that I said I needed to shade down. So I pick a spot on my dotted line and I shade down, which is right here. Next, let's go ahead and let's take a look at number 9. So we have 5x plus y is less than or equal to 10. So to solve for y, first thing I need to do is subtract 5x from both sides. So I get that y is less than or equal to -5x plus 10. That's already solved for y. I'm ready to make my choices in graph. Well, there's a solid line underneath, so my line needs to be solid. The alligator is facing away from the y, so I need to shade down. Solid line, shading down. So I'm crossing at 10, and I don't quite have 10 on here. So what I'm going to do is have the y-axis go by 2, and the x-axis go by 1. So if I'm going by 2's, I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Here is my 10 right here. And then my slope is -5, so I'm going down 5, right 1. So I'm going down 2, 4, and then here's 5 is halfway. And then over 1, since my x-axis is by 1s. Now I already decided that I need a solid line when I graph this. So there's my solid line. Then I'm going to pick a spot on the line and shade down from it. And when I shade down, it looks like that. All right, let's take a look at the last two here. So again, we need to solve these for y. So what I'm going to do here is I need to get that 3x over to the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 3x from both sides. So then I get that y is greater than or equal to 3x minus 6. So that's already completely solved for y. So I'm ready to make some decisions, okay? So I see that there's a solid line underneath, so I know that my line needs to be solid. And I also see that the alligator's facing the y, so I know that it needs to shade up. So we're crossing the y-axis at -6, which is down here. And then from there, my slope is -3, which is the same as -3 over 1. Well, I can't go down 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up 1, 2, 3, and go left. And I'm going to go ahead and graph that with a solid line. So if you notice, see how my line is still going down? So even though I went up, because I went left, I still have that downward sloping line. So now I need to shade up. So I'm going to pick a spot on that line and go up. And I'm going to shade above it. So it looks like that. Last but not least, let's take a look at this last one. So we need to solve for y. So I'm going to divide both sides by -2. With inequalities, when I'm dividing by that -2, I need to flip so that my inequality symbol is facing the other direction. 4 divided by -2 is -2, and then x. 10 divided by -2 is going to become a +5. So now I need to make decisions, again, looking at my final inequality. Well, there's no solid line underneath, so I know that my line needs to be dotted. It's also eating the y, so I know I need to shade up, again, looking at that final version. So we're crossing the y-axis at 5. And then my slope is -2, which is the same as -2 over 1. So I'm going down from that 5, going down 1, 2, and then right 1. And connecting those two dots, I'm going to have a dotted line. Then I'm going to pick a spot on the line and shade up from there. And that concludes your note video for today. Go ahead and show me your completed note sheet when you are done. Thanks for listening.